I call Ian McKelvey.
It gives me no great pleasure to follow the expert from Hutt South on animals. He clearly is an expert on life and times of the mower, but knows very little about farm animals, in my view. I just wanted to make a couple of comments on the comments he just made, because I think it's grossly unfair to include all farmers in the general statements that he just made. What I do want to make the point of is that MPI have a very strong team out in the provinces. They have a great understanding of farmers' ability to handle livestock, and I'm quite sure MPI are well aware of where the challenges are for them. And I certainly admit there are farmers who aren't perfect, Mr. Speaker. But I also want to make the point that I think they do a pretty good job on the whole, and we certainly do our best to work within the rules. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to get back to the topic of the day, the Animal Welfare Bill. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is critical to New Zealand's future. I do agree with the previous speaker on that point. It is probably one of the most important bills that will come through this House, along with perhaps the biosecurity bill and one or two other bills, interestingly, which affect the primary production sector, because that is the sector that keeps this country going. They have a very strong underlying, influence in how New Zealand's economy works and in how the primary production sector works. So the economy is driven by agriculture, and it in turn is driven by these hugely important bills that impact, or acts of parliament that impact on a food industry that's worth some $40 billion to New Zealand, and a livestock industry that contributes a large bit of that $40 billion to the food industry. We are amongst the best, or have amongst the best animal welfare codes in the world. We are very good practitioners in this field. And I will talk a little more about animal codes of welfare a little later, Mr. Speaker. But I first wanted to get on to a number of other issues that I guess have challenged the committee during the course of this bill, which was in the Select Committee for quite some time. We dealt with household pets, for example, and 70% of all households in New Zealand have pets. Gareth Morgan has picked on one very topical one, the cat. Most of our wild cats in New Zealand have started off as household pets, perhaps even in Hutt South, Mr. Speaker, and they have been dumped in our rural parts of New Zealand, and consequently that's a large piece of what causes the major cat problem that Gareth Morgan frequently refers to. Also, a large number of dogs, obviously, as pets in New Zealand, and many other animals. And I'm not saying for a minute that households don't look after their pets pretty well. I think on the whole they do. But certainly they come under pressure. And the other challenge we have with those household pets is the large number of unregistered dogs. Dogs that cause all sorts of problems in New Zealand's community. And in fact, we see some quite horrific injuries caused by those dogs when they attack children or even adults. And those are pets that have clearly not been maintained as they should be. They're also pets that come under the control of this very piece of legislation we're talking about. I want to briefly mention the greyhound industry, because the greyhound industry came in for a lot of focus in the course of the discussion on this bill. It is I guess a sport, which greyhound racing. It also contributes to the New Zealand economy. It's challenged by the fact that when you breed an animal for performance, you don't always get the performance you anticipate. We have to find other ways of dealing with those. And greyhounds are clearly dealt with under the dog code of welfare. So the issues that were raised by the greyhound, or by people with relationship to the greyhound racing industry, in my view, those issues are satisfactorily contained or dealt with in the dog's code of welfare. The other issue that's very topical is one of pests, and I guess you could put that in the same category as hunting. So pests such as, all introduced of course, opossums, cats, stoats, rats, etc. We spend an awful lot of time, and mice are also a significant pest. We spend a lot of time keeping them out of our food chain, keeping them out of places where we need to keep secure. We also have a great deal of problem with the opossums, particularly in our native bushes and our native forest. And cats and stoats and rats likewise cause grievous damage to our native birds. There was quite some significant discussion on that topic during the course of the consideration of this bill in the Select Committee, and I think, again, they are well dealt with under the relevant codes that apply to those issues. In New Zealand, we farm some 45 million animals, probably a lot more, in fact, but we have an official count of 45 million odd, and we deal with numerous issues with respect to them, including, and I'm not counting birds and things like that, so I'm not counting for the poultry industry in that, microchipping, tagging, earmarking, horses' teeth, blacksmiths' operations, all sorts of operations that take place on a daily basis with respect to animals. They were all dealt with in the course of the discussion on this bill. And if I go to some of the, things like horses' teeth, which were, dealt with in the discussion around surgical procedures that are undertaken with respect to animals. And for a long time, very good practitioners with no qualifications have dealt with things like horses' teeth and a number of other issues, blacksmithing. In some parts of the world, you have to have a ticket to enable you to shoe a horse under their welfare codes. In my view, New Zealanders are a much more adaptable people, and I think there are a large number of those procedures which can be undertaken extremely safely by people who have a great understanding of animals. And so that came in for a lot of discussion in the course of this bill as well. And I think we satisfactorily resolved that. I want to talk briefly about the live export of animals. And clearly we have an understanding there will be no live shipments for slaughter in New Zealand. We do, of course, sell a large number of horses overseas for both sport, racing and other uses. We sell a large number of breeding animals, sheep, dairy cattle, overseas for the same reason. And I guess that if you look at the food trends of the world, it's quite conceivable that sometime in the future there will be an opportunity to export very small numbers of very high-priced animals for slaughter. Or, well, I wouldn't call it slaughter. I guess there'll be a more practical term they'll use for it. By the time they get to that point, there'll be a more practical term. But I think and we didn't during the course of this consideration outlaw the potential for live export of animals. It's just that we have an understanding in this country that we will not do it, and I think wisely so too. But there may well come a time in the future when we get to a time when we can, in fact, export for human consumption again in a smaller and much more, enlightened way. I want to talk about codes of welfare for a moment, Mr. Speaker, and I have here the Dairy Cattle Code of Welfare. And anyone who was concerned about, the activities of NAWAC, the National Animal Welfare Advisory Council, who produce the codes of welfare for the Minister, will realise that these things are hugely comprehensive in my view. I think this is a very good document. Now, I would have considered, I suppose, as a farmer, that I don't need this kind of stuff, but I think, unfortunately, we do need to set a standard. These codes of welfare set a very clear standard, and I think they do a great job. So I think NAWAC, there was some significant discussion around the makeup of NAWAC. The Minister has the ability to appoint them, those members, and I think they are a very broad cross-section of the New Zealand, not only animal or industry experts, but also there's some independents on there who are very competent people. I think it's more than adequate. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to talk very briefly about the Minister and the Select Committee. Obviously, this bill is a very important, as I said, part of what we do. Been around for a while. In fact, 4 of the Select Committee who dealt with this bill have left this House, and Shane Arden, Eric Roy, Colin King and Shane Jones. They added a whole lot of value to this in the course of it. And of course, the current committee, of whom most of them are in this House right now, were also on that committee last year, with the exception of a couple of new members on our side of the House, Mr. Speaker, and this man sitting in the chair himself. We considered 1,721 submissions in the course of this bill, 12 industry groups, 20 advocacy groups and 8 professional bodies. It was a pretty big job. I think on the whole, the committee did an outstanding job with this bill, and I'm very pleased to see it coming through, and I congratulate the Minister on getting what will be one of New Zealand's key pieces of legislation through the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.